Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a new edition of our AUBER Roundtables, an online series featuring online presentations and discussions about regional and state economic research. My name is Patrick Barkey. I direct the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at the University of Montana. It's my honor to serve as president of AUBER, the Association for University Business and Economic Research, and introduce this program. Established in 1947, AUBER is a premier professional organization for regional economic centers across the United States, with members from 75 plus leading universities and affiliate organizations. We support member organizations that provide communities in every state with applied economic research and data that promotes informed decision-making and strengthens business environments. I invite you to visit our website, auber.org, if you'd like to get in touch or to learn more about us. Today's program highlights the pivotal nature of our research, featuring 3 leaders at AUBER research centers around the country. Let me start and introduce the moderator for today's program. Kathy Deck is Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. An economist by training, her research interests include regional economic development, industry market structure, and higher education economics. In 2017, she was elected president of AUBER. Prior to joining the Culverhouse College, she served for 10 years as director of the Center for Business and Economic Research in the Sam M. Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. Kathy, I turn the program over to you.
Thanks so much, Pat. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really thrilled that you could join us for this really important and very timely panel discussion that we have. We have 3 great states represented by 3 great AUBER Center directors. I'm going to introduce each of them in turn before they speak. We're going to start with Rich Wobbekind, then we're going to move to Steve Miller, and then we'll end up with Sean Snaith. I'd ask that if you have questions for our panelists, you put those in the chat, and I will then wait until after the presentations are over and address those questions to our panelists. So we do thank you for joining us for this exciting panel discussion that we have, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce Rich. Rich Wobbekind is the Associate Dean for Business and Government Relations and the Senior Economist and Faculty Director of the Business Research Division at the University of Colorado Boulder. He joined the faculty at the Leeds School of Business in 1985 and has served as an Associate Dean since 2000. Rich is the past president of the National Association for Business Economics, or NABE. He participates annually in the Kansas City Federal Reserve Bank Regional Economic Roundtable and is a contributor to the Western Blue Chip Forecast newsletter and the National Association of Business Economists Economic Outlook and Policy Surveys. Rich, I see that your presentation is up. Please take it away.
Thank you, Kathy. So when we're looking at this discussion, obviously, I would say, just knowing tourism, that you would start off and say, well, the states that were impacted the most would have been Nevada and Hawaii. And you might notice that there are 3 center directors presenting today, but Hawaii is not one of the states that we're presenting. Our center director from Hawaii, and we do have a very active center, AUBER has a very active center in Hawaii, is currently putting together budget projections for the legislature for their session, and is under full panic mode, I would say, is a fair description. So we'll miss Carl Bonham, who's our colleague, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of active discussion from the other participants. Following me, as Kathy might have mentioned, is Nevada. You're going to see some very striking slides from Stephen Miller as we go along, so I'll set you up for that. Starting on the flip side, though, when we're talking about Colorado, we're talking about a state that had one of the strongest, economies going into this downturn. We were in the top 5 for several years in a row. In our unemployment numbers in February were 2.5% unemployment statewide. We had projected job growth in our forecast in December but slowing job growth. And that's slowing job growth was really predicated on where we were in the business cycle, the national economy, but also just incredibly tight labor markets. We had lots and lots of industries reporting that they couldn't find enough people. Oh, for the old days, so to say. So we're looking at a little bit of a recovery. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you can sort of see the economic recovery that we're sort of building into this particular employment projection. But the number is somewhere in the vicinity of a loss of 125,000 jobs for the year. We're down more than that right now, but we're expecting with callbacks and sort of as this thing builds out into the fall, we'll start to see, you know, more and more people brought back, offsetting some of the people at least that have been taken off the payrolls. So we went from an unemployment rate of 2.5% up to the most recent data. We'll get the May data tomorrow, but the most recent data, we're running at 11.3% in terms of unemployment rate. So as you might imagine, the tourism sector is an important sector of Colorado. We like to think that we have a broader based economy than that. We have a lot of high tech, a lot of aerospace and other things, especially along the Front Range, which is the concentration of the economy. But you can see the big losers, March and April, in terms of employment change. If you look at the bottom sort of four categories, education, and those of you who are more familiar with the NAICS codes, it's education and healthcare. But education, we saw a lot of the smaller education institutions struggling. And then further down, accommodations and food services and arts, entertainment and recreation. That's arts, entertainment and recreation, of course, is where you find health clubs, in addition to performing arts, in addition to all of the theaters and things that are closed. Accommodations and food services, obviously a huge part of leisure and hospitality. So we really saw, you know, the concentration in terms of the job losses in the initial phase. We think that with the recovery, some of the industries are going to recover more like a V, but we're looking more for like a Nike swoosh or kind of a much longer and drawn out recovery for a lot of parts of the economy. And we think tourism is going to be one of those. So here's the initial jobless claims, and you can see we peaked back in April. We've been in this downward sort of decline. The number came out earlier this morning for the first week of June, was in the same range, 12,000, didn't go down significantly, much like the federal unemployment claims number, which came out today, didn't go down substantially, but kind of a flattening mode, and appears to be not getting too much worse, if you will, along in a more positive way to say that. But when you look at the unemployment rates by county, and then a little bit later we'll talk about the tourism concentrations by county to just apply it to the topic. If you look at the unemployment rates by county, and those of you, again, probably many of you not really familiar with Colorado, the eastern part of the state over to the right of the graphic is very flat agricultural ranch land part of the state. And you can see the unemployment rates have remained very low comparatively. They didn't have much tourism or high-tech types of things to lose. They didn't have a lot of hotels. They didn't have a lot of retail, shutdowns and so on. The really dark counties that you see on this map, the darkish brown, are the tourism focused counties. Pitkin County is where Aspen is. The down on the left, San Miguel County is where Telluride is. Vail is up in Eagle County. So you can see the different counties that you would see from the outside as places that would be skiing in the winter, but also a very heavy summer recreation as well. One that's a little stuck in there right next to down below Boulder, and the dark little piece is Gilpin. It is in the mountains, but it's really getting hammered by the closing of all the casinos. That's where we have casino gambling. So you can see the leisure and hospitality. I don't have to go through this too much, but you can see in the 2001 recession, which was pretty serious in Colorado. Took us longer to recover from the 2001 recession than the 2008 recession, even though the 2008 recession nationally was a bigger recession. But you can see the numbers for leisure and hospitality during those two recessions, and then you can see April year over year what leisure and hospitality look like, accommodations and food and arts, entertainment, and recreation. So this has been extremely painful. Again, you're going to see, I think, graphs that are similar to this in the other presentations coming up here shortly. And then this is the leisure and hospitality share of the employment, something I was alluding to earlier. So those counties that are in the dark brown have a very high share. Pitkin County, where Aspen is, 39% is leisure and hospitality. Summit County, 41.1%. So you can see very high concentrations compared to sort of the Front Range, Boulder, where we're located, 11.7%, and Denver, 12.6%. So you can see the differential, and that's why the Front Range is in a lighter tan color, where we have a concentration of a lot of our industry, comparatively less based on, less focused, if you will, on tourism in terms of its composition. Much more diverse economy and less tourism based. So you can see Colorado sales and use taxes, and a big part of this, of course, in terms of sales and use tax dropping off, is that this is where we have both Colorado state sales, retail sales tax, and also our local governments are very heavily funded by retail sales. And so when you have this dramatic drop off on retail sales, we're starting to get the collateral damage of layoffs at the local government level, and eventually we're going to see layoffs at the state government level. The state government had to slash their budget dramatically. They did that in many ways, including putting a lot less funding to higher education. And the University of Colorado announced 5% furloughs for everybody, $60,000 and above last week. So we're for the next year. So we're all going to have, there's going to be collateral damage from this huge drop off on sales tax. This is also another huge driver of the Colorado economy. DIA, the 5th busiest airport in the US and the 14th busiest in the world. And we see the employments dropping off there, and the most recent data in year over year for April, we're still down 94.3%. So tourism indicator of sorts, and an airport that was generating year over year 6-7% flight increases, major economic engine. And how long does it take for that to come back? That's, I think, a question that we'll get to when we get to Q&A. Casinos, I mentioned this to you. You can see in the upper right-hand corner of the graph, January, February, March is about half, and then April, there's no gaming at all in April. So you can see the adjusted gross proceeds from the casino industry. So the ski resorts has interesting impact. We shut down this season, as it says in these verbal pieces. The governor ordered all ski resorts to close for at least a week because we started to see some of the initial outbreaks in the state were happening up in the ski areas. And then residents, and many residents have ski passes of different types. And so they started suing the ski industry over their lost season pass values, since they lost the last several months of the ski season. And Vail provided a credit to the season pass holders, as it mentions on this slide. But going forward, they're really trying to be proactive, plan your next season with confidence, and this is all the guarantees they're giving going into this. So they really want people to go back in and buy passes, and then they don't want people to sort of say, take a wait and see, because they're going to need the cash flow. They're definitely going to need the cash flow. So it's an interesting situation, and one I, will be following closely. So we don't see this coming back quickly, unfortunately. We've said from the very beginning, and you've heard a lot of other people say this as well, we think it's going to be very much related to a vaccine and, better testing, where people are going to feel more confident to go out and restaurant meals and travel more, and especially flying in an airplane. So we'll see how that recovers, but that's going to be, extremely important for Colorado and Colorado tourism. So with that, I'm ending my my presentation, and we're going to pass it back over to Kathy to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Rich. That was fantastic and a really great kickoff for the panel. So next up, Steve Miller. Steve, you can go ahead and start bringing your slides up as he is doing so. Steve Miller is a professor of economics and the director of the Center for Business and Economic Research at the Lee Business School at UNLV. His research interests span monetary, macroeconomic, and international finance theory and policy, economic growth empirics, financial institutions, and real estate lending. Steve is often called upon by local and national media to comment on economic trends in Southern Nevada and across the nation. Steve, you're up. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Kathy. How am I doing on my voice? Is it good out there? So I've been talking about the Great Recession now for a long time. And every time I do that, I say that Las Vegas was ground zero for the Great Recession. And today's presentation is going to try to convince you that Las Vegas is once again ground zero for the COVID-19 recession. In the Great Recession, we had a lot of series that created ski jumps. Think of the Nordic, 90-meter ski jump, going down and flying off into the wild blue yonder. Well, in today's presentation, you're not going to see that. What you're going to see is falling off skyscrapers. Okay, this is our Southern Nevada Coincidence Index. So Southern Nevada is basically Las Vegas. And we can see that the index has turned south a bit. This is only March data because our index includes taxable sales, and taxable sales have quite a lag before we get the information. But we did see quite a drop there in the series. This is our leading index, which goes along with our coincident index. And a good leading index should turn before the economy does. Well, that didn't happen this time. And why not? Well, it's because the recession was caused by a public health issue and a government shutdown. It wasn't caused by sort of traditional economic events that lead to recessions. And in fact, in Southern Nevada, it looks like our peak was December of 2019. We know that nationally it was February of 2020. So the gray bars there represent the Southern Nevada recessions based on peaks and troughs in the coincident index. And so the peak there is December of 2019. Here's some information on employment across various metro areas in the West. Sorry, Sean, I didn't include Orlando. We see that Las Vegas, which is the red line, seriously outpaced the rest of the group, which included Phoenix in green, Los Angeles in blue, Denver in purple, Salt Lake in black, Albuquerque in brown, Seattle in light blue, and Portland in yellow. Those are all indexed to 100 in January 1990. But we get to the peak and we see the Las Vegas, of course, it's sort of hard to see because everything's squeezed up on the right side of the graph. So I looked at the last four months of growth rates of employment. Now these are monthly growth rates. So in Las Vegas, our monthly growth rate in April was just over 20%. If I annualize that, I'd get like 240%. Of course, can you lose 240% of your employment? Not likely. But we see that Las Vegas leads the pack in terms of reduction in employment. The growth rate downward in employment Los Angeles and Seattle take second place at about 15%, with Portland in fourth place. They're at about 13%. Here's our taxable sales. We see that it fell dramatically. This is only the March data. When we get the April data, we're going to see another big drop off in this particular chart. That data is, I checked this morning, it's not yet out. Here's gross gaming revenue. This is data through April. In February, gross gaming revenue was about $880 million. This is in Southern Nevada. And in March, it dropped to $540 million. And in April, it was $4 million. Say, well, how did they have gaming revenue? Well, they had gaming revenue online gaming that was going on primarily. Here's a picture of the unemployment rates by those same metro areas, and we see that everything's squeezed together because Las Vegas's unemployment rate jumped up to 33.5% in April. I saw this morning that the Nevada unemployment rate came out at 30.1% in April and was 25.3% in May. So it dropped by just almost 5%. But I think those numbers are subject to revision. They're so large that the confidence band on the estimates suggests to me they're likely to change going forward. Anyway, another way to look at this data is the last 4 months, and you can see that Las Vegas' unemployment rate leads the pack, followed by Los Angeles and Seattle. Here's the Clark County Tourism Index. So this includes hotel occupancy, McCarran passengers, and gross gaming revenue. And I didn't say earlier, all of our indices use the Department of Commerce method. And we see that the index fell dramatically. It's back at, if I look at it, it looks like it's over here around 1991 in terms of the level of the index. If we look at some of the subcomponents, here's McCarran Airport passengers. Rich looked at that in Denver. This is for McCarran. We had 4.5 million passengers in February, 2 million passengers in March, and 158,000 passengers in April. So it pretty much bottomed out. I think you can't have negative passengers, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Here's the hotel occupancy rate. Looks like it took a vacation because it was around 90% in February, it fell to 33% in March. And at the moment, I hope it bottomed out. It's at 1.7%. Of course, the casinos reopened on June 4th, so we should be getting some upturns in all of these data. Question is how much and how long is it going to take to. The anomaly is the construction index. It has not turned south. We have some big projects going on. There's the Raiders Stadium that is being completed. There's the Resorts World that is being completed. There's the Circa in downtown old Las Vegas that is being completed. The Drew, which is a big project, is shut down again, and there's some uncertainty about whether it's going to start up again. It was started during the time before the Great Recession. It was mothballed until very recently. But nevertheless, the construction index is still pointed upward. Here's construction employment. It is about 75,000 employment in Southern Nevada. Nowhere near the peak which we had back in 2006, which was about 113,000 employees in construction. I remember at that point in time, I was in New Orleans for a conference in, I forget whether it was 2006, 2005, the AA conference. And I happened to catch a piece about tourism in New Orleans. They said they had 45,000 rooms. That's my memory. But I knew that the LVCVA in Las Vegas had documented plans for 50,000 new rooms in Las Vegas at that point in time, to add to the 150,000 rooms we already had. Of course, that didn't happen because of the Great Recession. Okay, my slide appears to be stuck. What slide was I on? Construction employment, right? I think I may have to restart this if I can get rid of it. My apologies.
While Steve is figuring that out, I'll remind everybody that you should submit questions into the chat so that way you don't forget them when it's time for us to talk to Rich and Steve again. So.
Okay, let me see. Okay. You know, I don't know why it's always me, but never, if there's something that goes wrong, it's me. I don't know what the deal is. Okay, let's see if we can do it now. Share screen. I hope you're with me. It was this one. Okay. Is that employment? Construction. Okay. My apologies. Here's a quick picture of the Case-Shiller home price index through March. No, it's through March. I don't think April is out. The point I'd like to make here is that Phoenix and Las Vegas are holding up the rear of the procession. Los Angeles leads the pack in terms of the index. Of course, it's normalized to 1 in I think January 2000, and have not yet seen a turnout. But we haven't gotten the April data. The local news, the local press suggests that there's been some effect on housing, but people they're still selling houses. They're still being listed. Here's the affordability index. What I like to look at here is the dotted red line and the solid red line. The solid red line is Las Vegas. The dotted red line is Reno. And you notice that line going over to 2004, those two lines tended to follow each other pretty closely until about 2015. And then there's a little bit of a separation, and Reno housing is less affordable. What happened was that was the gigafactory up in the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center. And another way of looking at here's the similar picture with more California cities on there. And once again, we see that Las Vegas is more affordable than Reno. Here's some quick information on vacancy rates by industrial, retail, and office. The office market is still coming down. The retail and the industrial market have sort of converged on each other. There had been a lot of activity in large industrial space. So the last slide I have is looking at Washoe County, where Reno is located, the Tahoe Reno Industrial Complex, the gigafactory, the battery factory up there, diversified their economy to some extent. They're now at the national average in terms of the percentage of their employment in manufacturing, and their percentage of employment in gaming has fallen to about 15%. And Las Vegas is still at just under 30% in gaming. We have the Apex Industrial Park, and we thought we had the opportunity to attract what was called Faraday Future, which was an electric car company. They were going to build a plant in the Apex Industrial Park, which is north of North Las Vegas. It was going to employ about 4,500 people. If it had gone through, it would have been like the Gigafactory in its effect. Unfortunately, the money behind it was Chinese financing, and it disappeared after doing some work in the industrial park in terms of grading and that sort of thing. So Las Vegas is certainly a larger ship. We're about a little bit over 70% of the GDP in the state. Reno, Tahoe is around the 14-15%. So it takes a longer time to turn our ship around. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back to Kathy. Thank you. Sorry for the problem.
No problem. Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate that. I'm going to turn now to introduce Sean Snaith. Sean Snaith is the director of the University of Central Florida's Institute for Economic Forecasting and a nationally recognized economist in the field of business and economic forecasting. Sean is the recipient of multiple awards for the accuracy of his forecasts, his research, and his teaching. He has served as a consultant for local governments and multinational corporations such as Compaq, Dell, and IBM. Sean is frequently interviewed in international, national, and regional media, and it looks like he almost has his slideshow up.
Yes, Steve, could you unshare your screen?
And there he goes. So Sean, your turn. Thanks so much.
All right. All right. Okay, well, thank you. Steve, I guess his technical difficulties were your punishment for leaving Orlando off your comparison slide. So there's that.
Not very much of a penalty.
We've taken a pretty big hit here from COVID-19 in terms of tourism. Just to give you a little sense before I share our outlook here, we were looking at passenger traffic at the Orlando International Airport in calendar year 2019 was 50.6 million passengers, and to date we have about 11.3 million passengers. So at one point, passenger traffic was down 97% versus a year ago. And so, the major theme parks, of course, all shut down. Bars, restaurants, much of retail was closed. We're in the process of reopening, and we're in what's most of the state, with the exception of 3 counties in South Florida that were harder hit by the virus. Most of the state is in phase 2, which is bars are open at 50% capacity, movie theaters, concert venues open at 50% capacity, gyms are open, retail businesses are open at full capacity. And Universal Orlando has opened with restrictions. Disney is going to do so in mid-July, although they opened up their Disney Springs shopping area. So we're, excuse me, in the process of reopening things, and that has started to show some evidence in terms of retail sales activity, which is still down about 8% versus a year ago, but well up from where we were at the height of these public health measures. So things are on the comeback. Like every other state, we'll get the May report tomorrow here to get a sense of how far we've come since April, which was a pretty bad month in Florida. There was over 1.1 payroll jobs lost in that month, and the unemployment rate shot up to nearly 13%. So this has been deeper than the Great Recession was. It shared some similarities in terms of its severity, but as Stephen put out, this is a public health recession. It was self-inflicted, and so I think the recovery is going to be different than the recoveries we've seen in the last couple of recessions here in Florida. Our projections in terms of economic growth, year over year, state GDP growth is going to still be below where it was the previous year through the first quarter of 2021. Although we're projecting, that the state's economy is actually going to start to grow here at the end of the second quarter, and the U.S. retail sales report 17.7% for May, I think is a sign that that process may be underway. The unemployment rate, shot up into double digits. U6, the more broader measure of unemployment, is north of 20% in Florida, significantly north. A lot of that is underemployment. People are coming back, but they're not coming back to a full-time job in terms of the number of hours, especially with businesses that were on reduced capacity. So pretty significant loss in payroll jobs, concentrated where you might expect them to be, in leisure and hospitality segments of the retail sector. Some areas of professional business services were hit hard, particularly employment services, and like Rich mentioned, you roll back pre-pandemic, we had an unemployment rate less than 3%. And the problem with the labor market was finding workers, not too few workers with jobs. So a couple of months of these measures, and the economy's taken a pretty severe hit. Looking at the annual outlook, we're baking in a pretty sharp recovery in the national economy in the second half of 2020, and so that feeds into what we see and expect to happen here in Florida later in the year and then into 2021. The damage to the labor market, I think most here seem to agree that that's going to take a little longer to recover. The Deltas and the Disneys of the world, are going to still be here on the other side of the pandemic. It's the smaller businesses, the family-owned businesses, the little salons that, maybe were unable to access the PPP program or were unwilling to do so, didn't have cash reserves to basically carry them through a shutdown that drove revenues to zero. So that damage, those proprietors, their employees are going to have to find work elsewhere, and that process will be a little slower than the recovery and output in the state we anticipate. Retail sales took a pretty big hit here during the lockdown. That is the key driver for revenue at the state level. Sales tax revenue is essential. We're not exactly sure what the budget hit is going to look like here in Florida, but as the state opens up, those revenues are rising with the spending, and so we're not in as deep a hole right now as we were at the height of the lockdown. So hopefully that'll ease some of the budgetary difficulties that the state faces. Local governments not so much. They're primarily funded by property taxes, and I'll touch here on the housing market in just a moment. This is data from April from the Florida Realtors Association, and April was a bit of a wonky month because it was sort of in the midst of the shutdowns and the panic surrounding COVID-19, and so buyers and sellers were, I think, faced with some uncertainty regarding, do I have an open house? Do I go to an open house? I know that some realtors were trying to, as we are today, use virtual substitutes for in-person activity, but I think it weighed on the market in April, and you could see sales were down 20% year over year. Prices were not. And I think fundamentally, when we see the May data and get into June, the housing market in Florida is going to be in the same place that it was pre-pandemic with the same problem, and that is a lack of inventory. And you can see that inventories in April were down 17%. Some of that may have been hesitancy to list in the midst of this pandemic, but even prior to the pandemic, low inventories were a real problem. And so, you talk to real estate economists, and they typically say 6 to 9 months of inventory is a balanced housing market. And so we're on what the realtors call a seller's market side of that balance, with most of us on this call we call a shortage. And so the pressure on prices is going to be there. Having done a number of these Zoom conferences over the past several months, some of the participants were in the mortgage industry. And, I knew with, mortgage rates plummeting as they had, that there was going to be a significant amount, and has been a significant amount, of refinancing going on, and which is a good thing. I think that helps speed the recovery, is all those folks that were able to refinance now have disposable income to spend elsewhere other than on their mortgage payments. But they pointed out that activity was actually paling in May and beginning of June here to mortgage activity for new purchases, which they said was going through the roof. So I think the demand is still there in the housing market, and so that's a good thing. Nevada may have been the premier poster child for the last recession and the housing market's role in it. Florida was first or second runner-up, and that really weighed down on the state's recovery. The destruction of home equity wealth was pretty significant. The amount of foreclosures that were taking place were tremendous, and that really was a burden on Florida's recovery. And I would make the argument and back it up with data that Florida didn't fully emerge from the Great Recession until 2012. So sometime after the national economy came out in June of 2009. And that was because of the housing market. And so we don't have that burden. We don't have that yoke on us as the state reopens here. Tourism is going to be the main concern, and probably the slowest sector to recovery. Data and science notwithstanding, that could certainly be a game changer if there's a effective therapeutic or vaccine that comes onto the market. This COVID-19 becomes a non-issue at that point, and I think the recovery will be much steeper in tourism. You can see just a dramatic plunge in state GDP, which we're expecting to reverse itself very sharply as we come out of this recession, as the lockdowns continue to ease, as we move towards the final phase 3 of reopening, which is essentially, no restrictions on business activity, although I'm sure social distancing and other sanitary measures and hand sanitizer stations are going to be ubiquitous, until we get that science breakthrough. Payroll employment, as you see, just a very sharp plunge, as was the case everywhere because of these shutdowns. You throw 50 or 35 million plus people in a matter of 8 weeks, 9 weeks into unemployment. The same thing happened here in Florida. This was not a gradual, transition to recession. This was pulling the plug on large sectors of the economy and shut them down. And so we had a lot of problems with our unemployment system in Florida, being overwhelmed with applications. And so our weekly data is a bit noisy here, and I haven't had a lot of faith in that as a gauge. So I'm actually real interested to see what the monthly labor market report says tomorrow. Trade and transportation, the retail sector. If you were in the grocery business, this pandemic has been a boon to your activities. But for those non-essential retail outlets, clothing, etc., the malls were all shut down. There was significant job losses in those subsectors of the retail trade. Now that's starting to reopen. Those workers are getting back to work, at least part-time. as the state is in phase 2 of our reopening. And you can see tourism, just a remarkable plunge in employment. You know, when you have major employers like Disney and Universal here in Central Florida effectively shutting down, laying off 80, 90,000 people in one fell swoop. It's pretty dramatic. And then there's all the related industries, the hotels and support businesses. Of course, the cruise industry is an important subsector of tourism here in Florida. That has been devastated as well by COVID-19. What is the recovery going to look like? I think, as I've mentioned, data and science are going to really determine, in a large part, what this recovery looks like. These early shutdowns were based on models that were built on incomplete and in many ways flawed data. And so as we learn more about the virus in terms of who's, what the true death rate is of contracting it, not the case death rate, and the demographic nature of who's most likely to succumb to the virus. That information and contact tracing, antibody tests, the more we know about it, then I think that potentially the less this fear factor will be when it comes to travel and air travel in particular. I will say that the CEO of the Orlando International Airport thinks it'll be at least 5 years before they get back to the level of passenger traffic that they were experiencing pre-pandemic. I told him I thought that was a little bit pessimistic because of the science side of this making COVID-19 moot at some point. But fear is a factor here, and particularly when it comes to the air travel component of visitation here in the state. I was looking at beach cams over the Memorial Day weekend around the state. It didn't seem people were too afraid to go to the beach there. Talking to folks at Universal, their numbers are good, given their capacity restrictions. And I suspect the same will be true when Disney reopens. We saw Shanghai Disney reopened May 11th, and within a matter of hours, those tickets had sold out. So I think there's a lot of pent-up demand. I would call it pent-up demand squared, because in addition to the spending that didn't take place during the recession, folks have been pent up at home with the people formerly known as their loved ones, and I think they're willing to go, and are going to be more willing than I think some think will be the case. But that remains yet to be seen. Passenger traffic is starting to pick up at the airport, but I think we'll get a better sense of that once all the major theme parks have reopened in July. Our projections here in the second quarter: average growth of employment by sector through 2023. Leisure and hospitality, of course, are going to see very large numbers here as that sector reopens. Professional business services, that too, and particularly employment and business support services that were hit hard during the pandemic. The health industry also took a hit. You would think that a pandemic would be to the health industry what a hurricane is to the roofing industry here in Florida. But these hospitals were not doing elective procedures. They were not doing screening procedures, and these are pretty important revenue pieces for these hospitals and these healthcare providers. And so we did see some furloughs and reduced hours taking place in the midst of this. But many of them have resumed these practices, and speaking to anecdotally to some in the industry here, they're seeing a surge in patients coming back. Many who delayed procedures and screening. And so generally, I think Florida is in the recovery at this point. I think it's going to be relatively sharp. I don't know if it's going to be a V in the sense that the recovery mirrors the recession. I think it'll be a bit of a V where the recovery side of it is at a less steep angle. But we'll see as the data comes out if we're experiencing what we're observing nationally in terms of the economic recovery. So I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you very much, Sean. I am going to kind of start with a moderator's prerogative question, but also incorporate some of the questions that we've had in the chat. And that really is to all of you, and you all answered this to some extent. Do you see permanent harm coming to your tourism industries as a result of this? What, are there pieces of the infrastructure that aren't going to be able to come back? And then more specifically, what underlies your forecast generally? What assumptions are you making about the health side of this, the vaccine and other pieces of the puzzle? You want to start with that, Rich, and then we can go to Rich, Steve, then Sean. And
starting with me. So I think we're going to see the tourism industry come back. I would say very little of it's going to be lost permanently. But as Sean was saying, it's going to very much hinge on vaccine and people feeling more comfortable. And that sort of leads to the second part of your question. So when I say long-term, I'm talking, 3 years out, 2 to 3 years out, because big events and so on, which are really important, the convention center in downtown Denver and Red Rocks and the types of things we're doing, it's going to be a while until we see those types of things, not to mention ski areas at full volume. So that takes a little bit of time. Second part of that question, because of that, is why we have in our forecast model less of a V than Sean was describing and more of kind of a lot of industries taking a longer sort of road to recovery. And built into that, frankly, is the second wave of this that doesn't shut the economy down, but slows the economy down. So we don't get, we start to see more of this coming up through the flu season, and we're not putting a vaccine into this until middle of next year. So we have a slower sort of path up.
Well, in Las Vegas, one of the things that's sort of unusual is that over the next 5-6 years, the LVCVA had documented that about 12,000 new rooms were coming online. We do a population forecast out to 2060. And a part of that forecast, we tried to incorporate the effect of the rooms, but we made the assumption that only 2/3 of those rooms would come online based on evidence we had, sort of anecdotal evidence from people who know the industry, saying that 8,000 rooms may come online. That suggests you're going to have more employment in the leisure hospitality sector, even if you reduce the number of people per room that you end up going back to. I think is sort of consistent with Rich's view that in terms, and I think we're going to have an inverted W. So we're going to have a second wave. I don't think the vaccine will be there. I'd love to be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'll be one of the ones in line to get the vaccine, to get the shot. But I'm not sure how we're going to react. There's going to be a strong pressure not to close down or to retrench on what you've done, and so there'll be quite a battle over that, I think. And so forecasting right now is forecasting in general is dangerous. Is D squared right now, I'd say. So where do you, Sean?
My thinking about the therapeutics and the vaccine, and I'm not going to guarantee this, but I think that the incentive, financial incentive, I mean, think about this, to come up with a therapeutic treatment that effectively, will stop people from dying if they get the virus, and or a vaccine, which, I don't think will be a polio vaccine. It'll be more like the seasonal flu shot that, can reduce the likelihood that you get it, or at least reduce the severity when you get it. But, I mean, the carrot here is really big for these biopharmaceutical research companies to get this. And then you couple that with a reduction in sort of the regulatory stick that's typically involved in, going through these trials and these processes. I think some of these hurdles are being removed. The processes are being sped up. And so, early on, the story was that's 12 to 18 months to develop a vaccine. And that, historically, that's probably been true. But I think this is a fairly unique situation that could very well, shorten the runway here before one of these gets off the ground. And once we get there, then what, let's go skiing. I mean, let's go to Disney World. Did I lose here? Am I here?
You're still talking, Sean.
Oh, okay. So I mean, I think there's a real possibility, and once we get to that, that stage here in terms of the science, this is a non-issue. Now, might there be some permanent damage? Yeah, I mean, I think so. As I said earlier, these small businesses that won't reopen ever, that's going to take some time. But this isn't your grandfather's recession here. This is something wholly unique and wholly driven, by public health.
So Sean, you mentioned the regulatory differential we're seeing here, but let's talk about public policy generally. Do you all think that public policy has mattered as much? Or is the consumer voting with his or her feet, no matter what the shutdown environment looks like? Or are there specific public policies that you think could make this better, quicker?
Well, I would start by saying there's sort of two pieces. I applaud this sort of general public policy of, Federal Reserve and the federal government stepping in, and we might have disagreements on that. But thinking in terms of tourism specifically, getting air traffic back, getting cruise traffic back, are there policies perhaps we could pursue there? Like, I don't know, taking temperatures or whatever that might make people feel better about, getting on a plane or getting in a cruise ship or, whatever it might be. So I think that's, and for us, restaurants operating at 50%, I mean, most studies on restaurants show they need 75% volume to survive, and we're operating them, trying to operate them at 50%. So policies that could push that to 75%, ways to get that to 75%. I think things like that we should be thinking about.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. One, Sean talked about the speeding up of the regulatory process. Of course, the danger there is that you may adopt something that turns out to be more deadly at the margin than the case if you'd followed the regular process. It's a trade-off. And another random thought I had was talking about the regulation of biology. My daughter is a biologist. She works in a lab out on the East Coast, and basically the pandemic shut down the lab, except if you were working on COVID-19. So everybody and their brother and sister was switched their research over to COVID, or supporting Sean's comment that there's a lot of science activity trying to solve this problem. I think it's the case, correct me if I'm wrong, but this particular virus, the coronavirus, I don't know that we've ever had any vaccine to prevent that. There's been various strains around. So
well, to Rich's point about businesses taking measures to sort of help ease the customer's concern. They are taking temperatures as you enter the theme parks that have reopened at Universal. You know, it's sort of a gesture, right? Because, you know, you could be a carrier and not have a fever, but you have to wear a mask at Universal, which I guess I couldn't imagine that there'd be a way to make it more painful to go to the theme parks in the summer here in Orlando, but they came up with it, and that is to go to the theme parks in July and August with a mask on. So we'll see how willing are. You know, some people are still really freaked out about this, and you know, the news is all fairly negative surrounding the virus, and the emphasis is on, you know, bad interpretations of the data. You know, like some places hospitalizations are rising, but it's not COVID-19 hospitalizations. It's people that were afraid to go to the doctor and, you know, maybe had chest pain or a mild stroke, but didn't go because of COVID-19. Then they show up and suddenly they're hospitalized. So yeah, I think businesses are going to try to do what they can do to help quell the fear there. And policy-wise, in general, you can't really complain at the federal level. I mean, in terms of the policy response, at least the speed of it, right? I mean, it was like 16, 18 months for the totality of our policy, federal, to fight the Great Recession to get put into place. You know, this happened in a matter of weeks. Now, you know, were there problems with it? Sure. You know, was it effective? I mean, to a degree. You know, I would say it's like, you ever had a deep thigh bruise? You can put an ice pack on it, and that'll take some of the sting away, but you still got that deep pain that's going to last for some time. And I would put that federal response on par with that. I mean, I would prefer to see all that money go into the science, quite frankly, than to have to compensate for the shutdown.
Well, we have some really great questions, particularly one I'd really like to ask about the employment data and your confidence in it, but we are now at the hour mark. So I want to say thank you very much to all of our panelists. This has been fantastic. And we will be posting the presentations on the AUBER website. And we really do thank all of you for joining us at this. So thank you, Sean, Steve, and Rich, very much for your informative presentations.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.